Something happened last night that changed the way a certain person sees you. You may not know what was said. You may not know who delivered the information. You may not even realize that your name became part of a conversation that carried far more weight than anyone expected. But somewhere, behind a closed door, beneath a quiet night, something was revealed, something was understood, and something shifted, and now there is a strange feeling surrounding this connection. It is the feeling of someone realizing that the story they had been telling themselves about you was incomplete. For a long time, there may have been assumptions. There may have been unanswered questions. There may have been distance, silence, hesitation, or circumstances that made everything seem uncertain. Perhaps you wondered whether this person had forgotten you. Perhaps you wondered whether your absence had become normal to them. Perhaps you convinced yourself that whatever connection once existed had simply faded into the background of life. But sometimes silence does not mean the story is over. Sometimes silence is where people process what they are not yet ready to say. And last night, something may have forced a deeper realization. The news about you was unexpected. It may have been something simple on the surface. Someone may have mentioned your name. Someone may have shared an update. Someone may have described something you accomplished. Someone may have explained how you have changed. Someone may have told them something they never knew, but whatever the information was, it touched a place inside them that they had been trying not to examine. Suddenly, the questions became louder. Where are you now? How have you been? What has changed in your life? Why did I never understand them that way? Why does hearing their name still affect me? Why does this information feel so important? And perhaps the biggest question of all was the one they did not want to answer. Why do I still care? There are moments when life brings a person face to face with an emotion they thought they had already outgrown. That can be uncomfortable. It can be surprising. It can even be frightening. Because when someone has spent a long time convincing themselves that they have moved forward, discovering that a part of their heart still reacts can feel like standing in front of a door they thought they had permanently closed, and suddenly, the door is open again. You may have experienced something similar in your own life. You thought you were finished thinking about a certain chapter. And then one small reminder brought everything back. You heard a song, you saw a familiar place, someone mentioned a name, you remembered a conversation, you noticed an old photograph, and for a moment, the past did not feel like the past. It felt close. That is why this message is not really about predicting exactly what happened last night. It is about recognizing something deeper. People can hide their thoughts from others, but they cannot always hide them from themselves. Eventually, truth becomes too heavy to ignore, and perhaps the news this person received about you became one of those moments. They may have discovered that you are doing better than they expected. They may have learned that you are stronger than you appeared. They may have heard that you have changed your priorities. They may have heard that you are no longer waiting for the same things. They may have realized that the version of you they remember is not the version of you that exists today. And that realization can shake someone, because people often become attached to an old picture of another person, They remember who you were during a particular season. They remember your struggles. They remember your fears. They remember your uncertainty. They remember moments when you needed reassurance. But growth changes the picture. You may have spent time becoming more independent, more thoughtful, more peaceful, and more aware of what you deserve from the people around you. You may have learned to stop chasing explanations. You may have learned that not every unanswered question needs an immediate answer. You may have learned that your worth does not depend on whether someone chooses you. And perhaps that is what this person has finally begun to understand. You are not standing where they left you. You are moving. You are growing. You are becoming. And sometimes the person who underestimated your transformation is the person most surprised by it. That is why the news could have affected them so strongly. Not because you need to become someone else to be worthy of attention, but because your growth may have revealed something they were previously unable to see. The strange thing about human connection is that people often recognize value after distance has given them perspective. When someone is close to you, they may become accustomed to your presence. They may stop noticing the little things. They may assume your kindness will always be available. They may assume your attention will always return. They may assume that tomorrow will look like today. Then circumstances change, space appears, life moves forward, and suddenly, the person realizes that what they once considered ordinary was actually precious. Perhaps last night brought that realization. Maybe the news reminded them of a moment they had forgotten. Maybe it reminded them of something you once said. Maybe someone described you in a way that made them realize how little they truly understood. Maybe they heard that you had made a decision. Maybe they learned that you were entering a new season. Maybe they discovered that you had stopped waiting for something that once seemed important. And suddenly, they were forced to confront the possibility that life does not remain still for anyone. People change, opportunities change, relationships change, seasons end, new seasons begin. And sometimes the greatest shock is realizing that the person you assumed would remain emotionally available may eventually choose peace instead. That does not mean you should wait for this person. It does not mean you should interpret every coincidence as a sign. It does not mean you should put your life on hold. Quite the opposite. The heart of this message is about moving forward with wisdom. If someone genuinely cares about you, their actions should eventually communicate that care. Healthy connection does not require endless guessing. Healthy connection does not demand that you decode every silence. Healthy connection does not require you to sacrifice your peace just to understand someone else's uncertainty. So if this message resonates with you, let it remind you of something important. Your life is happening now, not someday, not when another person finally understands you. Not when someone decides to return, not when someone sends the perfect message, now. Your growth matters now, your peace matters now, your dreams matter now. Your relationships with family, friends, teachers, mentors, and the people who genuinely support you matter now. You do not need to pause your life while wondering what another person may be thinking. And yet, there is something beautiful about realizing that your growth can affect people without you trying to impress them. You do not have to announce every transformation. You do not have to prove that you have changed. sometimes the strongest transformation is quiet. You simply begin making different choices. You begin protecting your time. You begin listening more carefully. You stop responding to every distraction. You become more comfortable with uncertainty. You stop forcing connections that continually leave you confused. You begin understanding that your future deserves your attention, and one day, someone who knew an earlier version of you may notice. They may think something is different. They may not immediately understand what changed, but they can feel the difference. Your energy is different because your priorities are different. Your confidence is different because your foundation is different. Your peace is different because you no longer need everyone to understand you. And that kind of growth can be powerful. Perhaps the news last night simply became the moment when this person finally noticed. Maybe they were told something about your life and sat quietly afterward. Maybe they expected to feel nothing. Instead, they felt something. Maybe surprise, maybe regret, maybe curiosity, maybe admiration, maybe concern, maybe a mixture of emotions they could not easily name. And when several emotions arrive at once, people sometimes become quiet. They need time. They replay conversations. They reconsider decisions. They remember details. They ask themselves questions they avoided before. That may be why the idea of them still shaking is such a powerful image. It represents emotional disruption, not necessarily fear, not necessarily something dramatic, but the inner shaking that happens when a person discovers that reality does not match the story they had created. They thought they knew where you were emotionally. They thought they knew what you wanted. They thought they knew what would happen next, and suddenly, they are not so sure. But remember this: their uncertainty is not your responsibility. Their processing is not your assignment. Their realization is not something you have to manage. If they have something meaningful to communicate, they can communicate it respectfully. If they have something important to say, they can choose honest words. If they want to repair something, they can demonstrate that through consistent actions. You do not need to become a detective of another person's emotions. You can simply continue becoming the best version of yourself. That is where your strength is. There is also another possibility hidden inside this message. Maybe the news was not only about who you are becoming. Maybe it was about what you are no longer willing to tolerate. Perhaps someone told them that you have become more selective about the people you allow close to you. Perhaps they learned that you are no longer entertaining unnecessary drama. Perhaps they heard that you are focusing on school, work, creativity, family, personal goals, or your future. Perhaps they realized that your world is expanding. And when someone's world expands, the people around them must decide whether they are willing to grow too. Some people will celebrate your growth. Some will misunderstand it. Some will become curious. Some may feel left behind. But none of those reactions should make you shrink. You are allowed to grow. You are allowed to change. You are allowed to discover new interests. You are allowed to develop new boundaries. You are allowed to become more thoughtful about who receives your time and attention. And if someone genuinely belongs in your life, healthy connection will have room for that growth. The message here is not, wait for your soulmate. The message is, do not abandon yourself while wondering about another person. That distinction matters. There is a beautiful difference between hope and waiting. Hope can inspire you while you continue living. Waiting can sometimes make you stop. Hope says, whatever happens, I will continue growing. Waiting says, I cannot move until someone else makes a decision. Choose hope, choose movement, choose wisdom, and if there is a future connection meant to develop naturally, it will not require you to destroy your present peace. Maybe this is why the news from last night feels so significant in the story. It symbolizes a turning point. Someone received information. Someone realized something. Someone's perspective changed. And now they have a choice. They can remain silent. They can reflect. They can communicate. They can take responsibility for their actions. Or they can continue living according to old assumptions. That choice belongs to them. Your choice belongs to you. And your choice can be simple. Keep growing, keep learning, keep becoming, keep your heart open without abandoning your judgment, be hopeful without becoming dependent on a prediction, be compassionate without ignoring your boundaries, be patient without putting your life on pause, because sometimes the most powerful response to unexpected news is not chasing an explanation. It is continuing forward. Imagine waking up tomorrow with no need to know what anyone else is thinking. Imagine starting your day focused on what you can actually control, your choices, your words, your effort, your relationships, your responsibilities, your goals, your attitude, your future. That is freedom, and perhaps, ironically, that freedom is what makes meaningful connections healthier. When two people are secure enough to live their own lives, connection becomes a choice rather than a desperate need. There is room for honesty. There is room for boundaries. There is room for growth. There is room for respect. And there is room for people to discover each other without pretending to know the future. So if you have been feeling as though something is shifting, do not panic. You do not have to force an interpretation. Let life reveal itself through real events. If someone reaches out, listen carefully. If someone apologizes, pay attention to whether their actions match their words. If someone says they care, notice whether they treat you with respect. If someone wants to rebuild trust, allow time to reveal whether the change is genuine. Words can be emotional, actions are evidence, consistency is powerful, and your peace is valuable. Maybe the person who received the news last night is realizing that you are more important to them than they previously admitted. Maybe they are reconsidering something. Maybe they are remembering you. Maybe they are simply surprised by how much your life has changed. But whatever they are feeling, you do not have to carry it for them. Let them process their own emotions. Let them make their own decisions. Let them become responsible for their own communication. Your task is to remain grounded. There may be moments when your mind tries to create an entire story from one small coincidence. You may see a familiar name. You may notice an unexpected message. You may hear a song at exactly the wrong or right moment. You may dream about someone. You may remember a conversation. Those experiences can feel meaningful, but they do not automatically tell you what another person thinks. Use them as opportunities for reflection, not as commands. Ask yourself, what am I feeling? What do I actually know? What am I assuming? What do I need? What would a healthy relationship look like? What would protect my peace? Those questions can guide you better than speculation ever could. And perhaps the deepest message here is that you are entering a season where clarity matters more than fantasy. You do not need mysterious answers when honest communication is possible. You do not need to chase signs when real behavior can tell you what you need to know. You do not need to convince someone to recognize your value. Your value exists before anyone recognizes it. That is something worth remembering. Maybe the news last night was shocking because someone finally realized this. Maybe they discovered that you are not the person they thought you were. Maybe they learned that you have been carrying more strength than they understood. Maybe they realized that your silence was not weakness. Maybe your distance was not hatred. Maybe your growth was not rejection. Maybe you were simply learning how to stand on your own, and sometimes that realization changes everything. A person can look back and understand a moment differently. They can remember something they said and think, I should have handled that differently. They can remember an opportunity and realize they did not appreciate it. They can remember someone's kindness and finally understand how rare it was, but regret, by itself, is not enough. Real growth requires responsibility, real change requires action, real connection requires respect. So if this person eventually comes forward, let their behavior speak. Do not be impressed by dramatic promises alone. Look for sincerity. Look for patience. Look for accountability. Look for kindness. Look for consistency. Look for the willingness to respect your boundaries. And remember that you are allowed to take your time. You do not owe anyone an immediate answer simply because they finally understand something. You can pause. You can think. You can ask questions. You can protect yourself. You can decide what belongs in your life. That is not coldness. That is maturity. Perhaps there is another layer to what happened last night. Maybe the news was not delivered directly. Maybe someone else became the messenger. Maybe a friend, relative, classmate, coworker, or mutual acquaintance mentioned something about you, and perhaps the person listening tried to appear calm. They nodded, they asked a few questions, they acted normal, but internally, something shifted. This is a familiar human experience. We sometimes learn something unexpectedly and suddenly realize that someone has continued living a life beyond our awareness. The person we remember has new experiences, new friendships, new goals, new lessons, new responsibilities, new dreams, and realizing that can be emotional. It reminds us that time does not wait. Everyone is becoming someone. Everyone is carrying a story. Everyone has chapters that other people never see. Perhaps this news gave that person a glimpse into one of your unseen chapters, and maybe that glimpse was enough to change their perspective. But you should not live your life hoping someone will eventually discover your value. Live because your life is worth living. Learn because knowledge expands you. Create because creativity gives your thoughts a voice. Love your family and friends because healthy relationships matter. Take care of your responsibilities. Build your future. Laugh. Rest. Explore. Grow. and allow relationships to develop naturally. If a meaningful connection is meant to continue, it should become clearer through reality, not through fear, not through obsession, not through constant guessing, not through sacrificing your well-being. Clarity is peaceful, healthy connection is peaceful, respect is peaceful, and when something is healthy, you should not have to continually convince yourself that confusion is proof of depth. Sometimes confusion is simply confusion. Sometimes silence is simply silence. Sometimes a coincidence is simply a coincidence. And sometimes a real conversation is exactly what is needed. This message can still carry hope. Without pretending to predict the future, hope can say, something can change, people can grow, misunderstandings can be corrected, distance can create perspective, truth can become clearer. But hope should never require you to abandon reality. That is the balance. And perhaps that balance is exactly what you are learning now. You can believe in meaningful connection while remaining grounded. You can dream about the future while building your present. You can care about someone while still caring for yourself. You can forgive without forgetting what you learned. You can remain open without becoming vulnerable to manipulation. You can be kind without saying yes to everything. You can have a soft heart and strong boundaries at the same time. Maybe that is the transformation this entire message is pointing toward, not merely someone else's realization, yours. Maybe you are beginning to realize that you do not need to chase what is uncertain. Maybe you are realizing that the right people will not require you to constantly prove yourself. Maybe you are realizing that your future cannot depend on another person's emotional timing.